Hello and welcome. It is episode number 41, the Hilarious Humanitarians Podcast. My name is Frances Echeverria, licensed marriage and family therapist.
And I am Deanna Silverman, licensed clinical social worker.
Today we are going to be talking about the fact that we're all going to die. And we warned you in the earlier podcast the last couple of weeks, but we need to talk about it. So today we have quite a bit to cover, but want to start by letting you know where to find us online. Deanna, Hilarious Humanitarian. And your website, right?
Yeah, hilarioushumanitarian.com.
You can also find me using Shut Up Skippy on Instagram, also on Snapchat and shutupskippy.com. Before we jump into our topic today, I want to remind you, thank you, first of all, for listening, but also rate and subscribe to the podcast to make sure you get it every single Friday. And the disclaimer, as per usual, but we want to cover our asses. The Hilarious Humanitarians Podcast is for informational purposes only, does not constitute medical advice, and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, mental health professional, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. So, as we're starting today, we are fully aware that this is really, really an uncomfortable, icky subject. But we want to help people out, right, by starting the conversation.
Exactly. And all of us are going to go through this. There's like it's kind of weird when you think about life. Okay, sometimes when I'll just like trip out by myself and sit outside, stare at the stars and get all philosophical, I'm like, okay, what is the one thing that we're all going to go through? There aren't many things in this life that you can say 100% are going to go through. Mm-hmm. You know, death is honestly, like, you can't even say like life. Not everybody is going to bring life into this world. Not everybody is going to witness life being brought into this world, but we're all going to, if we're alive, one day we're going to be dead. And that's just the reality of it.
And with life expectancies these days, people are living longer and having to think about that. And as Vanessa, our guest, pointed out over the last couple of weeks when we were talking about grief and loss, you're never too young to come face to face with your own mortality or that of your loved ones. So today we are going to talk about how to postpone death in certain ways and also prepare for your own death. But I have to be totally honest. I was glad that my kids went into the other room when we're recording this, because I was thinking that's going to be an interesting conversation. And we'll touch on that along with health screenings as we age, life insurance, estate planning, final wishes, also some differences in end-of-life care, guardianship, not just for people with kids, but for your animals, and also talking about this to your social support system. And this one's really weird, talking to your own parents about them aging.
Have you done that with your dad?
Very minimally.
Is that because of how you feel about talking to him, or do you feel like he'll shut it down?
You know what? I think this is a good place to jump in on talking about it. So my mom told me when I was 8 she was dying, and she died when I was 33. So that was a long time worried about whether or not your mom's going to die or knowing it was coming. I think in our family, and I see this a lot in just talking to some of my friends, the reason why it doesn't come up, especially when you're talking about like, hey, so what happens, you know, if you have like a house and business and stuff, is I don't want my parents thinking I'm plotting their death so that I can get their things.
Yeah,
and I hear that a lot.
I've heard that too, which is like weird. What are we watching? Like, not weird, because I hear it enough to where I feel like it's not necessarily weird. It's definitely I would say myth. It's just this like weird thing that we've heard all our lives, or like seen on movies and TVs. And then we don't want to be portrayed as the person who's trying to like prematurely talk about wills and trusts, and like we're going to somehow like knock off our parents. You know what not to be so crude about it, but it's like people get held back from having really important discussions because they think it may be misconstrued or perceived as you're trying to pull a fast one on your family.
I mean, I know for sure that's why we haven't brought it up. It's only, and then you get into weird sibling dynamics and who's in charge of what and who gets what things. And usually what ends up happening is, I've witnessed this before, it just turns into a shit show after someone dies. I mean, fortunately, when my mom died, they had enough things in order but then it all changed again, right? So like after my mom died, then everything that they owned together went to my dad. And then from there, there's like changes in ways. And honestly, the only conversation that I've had with my dad about his dying is that he called to see how to spell my name, absolutely the legal spelling of my name, whether I was still going by my ex's name or whatever, because he needed it for documents. And that was the extent.
Oh, God. Yeah.
What about you?
Oh, God. Where do I start? One day I really should write a book about this. Take the textbook version of everything shitty that happens when you're not prepared and your family does not have a discussion. That was my family.
With your mom?
With my mom. I say we, but I mean, I don't know if my brother listens to my podcast show, he may come back and be like, no, I disagree. But from what I know and from what I remember, towards the end of her life, I felt like I was the only person that was trying to have a conversation about what the hell was going on. Even to the point of like looking at my mom who was dying.
Because you knew this wasn't a car accident.
Right. And she looked awful towards the end of her life. Like she looked like a skeleton, and she had just come out of the hospital, and it was like she was in the hospital for like 3.5 months. She wasn't in a coma, but she was unresponsive pretty much, and she couldn't walk because she had a tumor on her like sciatic nerve down there, which impeded her from walking. She was really close to dying then. She made a turnaround and came home, but like a turnaround, what does that even mean when you still really can't walk and you look like a skeleton? So I remember looking at her and going like, Mom, are you dying? And it was so difficult for me to say that, but I was looking for something other than, no, I'm going to make it. Because I heard that and I believed it for many years. And then it got to a tipping point of like, I don't think you are. And that was like so painful to come to grips with. But when I even said that to her, I'm like, Mom, are you, like, I literally looked at her and said, Mom, are you dying? She said, no, I'm not. I'm going to beat this. And like, she wasn't. I just knew looking at everything, she was not going to beat this. And I even said to her, okay, hypothetically speaking, if you don't make it, what would you say to me? Like,
you're
what
talking in this cryptic stuff because she didn't want to talk to you about dying.
Right, exactly. And she just looked at me and she was like, Deanna, I'm not going to die. And I just, what am I supposed to do at that point? Like, I can't. She was like nodding in and out of consciousness at that point. I mean, there was really no good time to talk about it. And so a few months later when she died, I mean, it took a few years for me to like have the clouds part and for me to like see and think clearly. But I remember thinking, a lot of people ask me on Instagram, they'll reach out to me and say like, what made you want to get into social work? What made you want to get your master's in social work and get into medical social work? And I'm like, everything I went through with my mom. I really, if I can help it, if I can just make one family not go through what I went through, like it will be worth it, which means to me and still means to me till this day to have these discussions before your parent or whoever looks like a skeleton. Like I didn't have a choice. And it kind of just happened the way it happened. And with my family dynamic, my mom, like growing up, she was like terrified of death. We never talked about death. And even when like other loved ones passed away, she was like, I'm not going to go see their dead body. No way. Like,
okay. Yeah.
Even when my mom died, they called me from the hospital and they were like, do you want to see her? And I was like screaming and I'm like, no, absolutely not. I called my brother. I'm like, don't go. And now like in retrospect, I wish I would have had a different mindset. I wish these conversations would have happened. I wish I would have been more comfortable to have seen her. You know, I just wish things could have played out differently, but I don't beat myself up about it because that's all I really knew at the time. And I just was going based on what I kind of grew up being told and learned. So after that experience, I actually went into hospice and oncology work and palliative care and more specifically hospice, and then into the ER for almost 4 years where, I mean, I saw somebody die at least at least once a month, And so then I just kind of decided I want to get comfortable with death. I know it sounds weird, but I want to be comfortable with seeing people die, with being next. Like, I want to be a good support to people who are grieving. I even want to know how to be comfortable with like being with somebody who just finds out, who just witnesses their family member dying. Because there aren't enough people in this world, quite frankly, who actually, I don't want to say world. There aren't enough people in this country who are that comfortable seeing people die and support those who are grieving. And I say country because when you look outside the United States, things culturally are pretty dramatically different.
We talked about that with Vanessa because she works with such different cultural groups, and we really have in the United States done ourselves a disservice by doing things like only allowing 1 day bereavement, 3 days bereavement, that kind of stuff. And so maybe we're just starting the conversation now so that maybe it changes. Stranger things have happened.
Yeah. Oh God, I remember like my mom died, I think it was a Wednesday. I don't remember. I think it was the middle of the week. I know I was headed to work because it was 9 a.m. when I got the call. And I had bereavement time up until that Friday, which was her funeral. I mean, we're Jewish, so like Jewish funerals have to happen within like a certain amount, like a couple days after the death. But I know that there's certain religions who it's not uncommon to wait a few weeks. And so
that's what we did.
Right. And so I think to myself, like, oh my God, there's people out there that have bereavement time. And so it's like 3 days. And then you're supposed to go back to work and just be this functioning human being who's like planning a funeral and anticipating a funeral for a few weeks. Like, depending on who you are in your emotional state, I mean, I just couldn't imagine. And so what ended up happening with me is I went on bereavement for 3 days and then I returned to work. Like, I don't know what the fuck to do. Like, here I am. And my boss actually sat me down and was like, if you don't take more time off, we're going to lovingly fire you.
Well, yeah, especially the line of work you're working in. So with my mom, my dad and sister showed up that morning of my kid's birthday party. And within a few hours after finding out she had died, which was kind of surprising because I knew she had been sick, I had a kid's birthday and then back at work the next week. And the thing that I learned, being on the air was people don't want to hear you grieve. So it took a whole week for me to then share with people that she had died. So it was an interesting situation, but I wanted to go back to what you said about you were like, absolutely not. Don't want to see your mom's body. I didn't want to see my mom's body. I'm still glad I didn't see my mom's body. The last memory I have of my mom is seeing her on Christmas, opening a gift. And that's okay.
And I totally understand that perspective too. I mean, and I've thought about it probably 100 times.
Mm-hmm.
Would it change? With me, I don't know. It's kind of like, we kind of beat ourselves up over like the what ifs. And maybe I'm getting caught up in that. The last time I saw her, it's kind of funny. Last time I saw her, we kind of got into an argument about like grad school because my brother was in law school. And she's like, when are you going to apply for grad school? And I was like, will you just leave me alone? And it's so funny. I have like a horrible memory, but like I remember everything from that day. I remember like we went to Whole Foods and picked up olives and a baguette, brought them into the hospital to like eat them with her. And my brother and I went skydiving that day. And so my mom made us stop by the hospital just in case we died, which is so dark. It's just so dark, like stop by the hospital in case you die. And then 3 days later she died. What the,
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess it's not so much for me. Like, I'm really upset. I'm not upset or anything, but maybe I would have done things differently now that I'm more comfortable with death.
Right.
I think it's just the whole picture. I wish we would have had a conversation. I wish that my entire family system wasn't so afraid of talking about death, afraid of talking about end of life issues, because the aftermath is so horrible, or it can be so horrible. I don't want to say it's horrible because some people's family members die and affairs are in order and whatnot. But
right.
like I said, I had nothing in order.
You could save yourself some of the burden and then just be able to be there for the grief, which is what we're hoping in bringing this up today. And, you know, it sounds like your situation and my situation are the same. And so we have a choice to then change that with our children. So
yes, absolutely. And I want to say real quick, because I listened to the episodes that you just released with Vanessa, because, you know, I was out, but I still listened. And you said something on the episode about how you're not really quick to share this with people because there's so much like judgment or people just don't understand. But like when your mom passed away, you felt some relief, like, oh, it's over. Not, I want my mom to die. Right. I'm happy that she died. And that resonated in me because when my mom died, it was just overwhelming. The grief was overwhelming and I missed her so horribly. But I was relieved that the struggle with the illness was over.
Right. And the pain that's in it.
Yeah. I was relieved that she no longer had to go through that. I was relieved that we didn't have to hold our breath anymore. Like I always describe like those 8 years of like holding your breath underwater and really not knowing how to swim that well. You're just struggling, or I'm not saying you, I don't want to say you. I was struggling the entire time. You know, every time she had a doctor's appointment, you're just going, well, what did the doctor say? Well, they told us that they'll give us a call back in 2 weeks. You're holding your breath for 2 weeks. You're anticipating. You can't sleep. I mean, I grinded my enamel off like all my teeth. I have the worst teeth because I grinded my teeth so bad that I just wore all my teeth down during that time. I had restless leg syndrome, insomnia, like you name it. And not to mention everything else my mom went through, which what I went through was just a sliver of the pain and suffering she went through. So when she died, it was a relief that was over, but then the grief sets in and the absence of that person washes over you and stays for a lifetime. You have to deal with it.
So both of our moms died of disease. Your mom from cancer, my mom from complications with kidney failure and a host of other things, and a lot of it that could have been changed with some of her lifestyle habits. So one of the things we want to bring up is we're challenging you to think about the fact that, you know, we're mortal, we're human, is starting with healthy choices and also health screenings. You know, you and I are both young. We're in our 30s. Unless there's breast cancer in the family, mammograms aren't starting till later, but there are other things we should be doing on a regular basis to be making sure that our physical health is up. Mm-hmm. When's the last time you got a physical?
When's the last time I got a physical? Probably it was a few months before I got pregnant. So it was like almost 2 years ago. I don't count like the post-baby physical.
Right.
They're just making sure you can like go back to work and be functioning.
Yeah.
But I have a physical scheduled in a few months and actually in September. Why am I excited about that? I don't know.
Because we're being grown-ups.
Yeah.
What was useful for me was to schedule my physical right around the time. I think I just got onto a routine with my son. So every year, right, kids have their child checks as they get older, and just making it a point to do it the same. Now, I think what ends up happening is sometimes we get busy with life and now look, I'm functioning from this idea that people have access to healthcare. I understand that there are varying degrees of access to healthcare, but if that is something that you do have, then to do the things that you can, including just having like an idea of your vitals, you know, blood pressure, that kind of stuff.
Or even just, I will say, I don't like going to the doctor as much as I worked in the medical field, and I know many doctors and nurses who are my personal friends. Even though I said I'm excited, I don't like being kept in the dark, but also there is some like nervous energy. Mm-hmm. Also, I'm so time limited right now with everything I'm doing in my life and raising my child that the idea of scheduling a doctor's appointment for 3:00 only to be seen at 5 p.m., me twiddling my fingers, waiting for someone to come in and talk to me for 15 minutes to tell me to go to a lab to get my blood drawn and then wait 2 weeks. Okay, I would rather eat glass than seriously do that. That sounds like an awful day. But to put it off, I've seen people who have like huge tumors growing out of their neck and their head. And it's like, have you ever gotten that checked? No, I'm scared of the doctor. It's like, and I understand as like a clinician and a trained professional that you can dig a little bit deeper and find out, like, process that with them. But especially if you have children and you're afraid of leaving them prematurely in life, I think it is our duty and our responsibility to get those things checked. If it's not a tumor hanging off of your neck, you can, like, if you have the funds. I just recently bought a blood pressure cuff off Amazon for like $14 because I'm always thinking like, oh, my blood pressure is like out of control or something. And so it just helps with my anxiety and my peace of mind to take it, once or twice a day and be like, okay, I'm good.
Right. And I think too, what's important is I don't like going to the doctor either. What I've just told myself in my head is that's going to be quiet time for me to read, and when we talk about self-care and things and putting yourself first, it's a good idea, especially if you have a family history. Now, I want to reiterate that we are not talking outside of our scope here in terms of being therapists and stuff. This is us being people. I am genetically screwed from both sides. So it is very important that I stay up on things, not to the point where I'm worried that everything's going to be an illness, but you need to know your family history. It's important, and we do owe that to our kids. So just based on your ages, getting the screenings you need, being aware at least, and moving in that direction. Now, this next one, Deanna and I talked about off the air as we were preparing, and this was the one thing that I did, would have wrapped up last year that I got it taken care of, and I felt like an absolute grown-up, and that was getting life insurance, because I don't have it through work.
Yes, yeah. I will admit it. I don't have life insurance right now on me. My husband and I keep talking about it, and I need to do it. But my husband, we have life insurance on him. And if you can, once again, we're not saying in a perfect world, everyone could have it. But we understand that this is an out-of-pocket expense, right?
Right.
If you can, though, if you can set up your children, I would say just do it. As somebody who... so I'm hesitating to talk about this, and I really shouldn't because the money's gone anyway. I'm going so far in my head, like, I don't want to share personal information like this because what if people come after me? And then it's like, wait a second, do it, because I spent it all on my student loans. But when my mom died, I didn't know she had life insurance. And when she died, I got a phone call about a month later from my stepdad who was like, hey, your mom had life insurance and we're going to send you a check. I'm not going to disclose the amount, but put it to you this way, I was able to pay for going to grad school at USC, which is very expensive. And it set me up, it afforded me to do things that my mom would have wanted me to do, like go to grad school, like be able to live comfortably. And it set me up with certain resources that allowed me to do things in life that I absolutely would not have been able to do without it. Not to mention, like, if you're like, God forbid my husband were to die, he's the sole breadwinner right now. Like, who's going to pay the mortgage?
Right. And that's the thing to think about. And even, ideally, yes, you could get a policy that would pay for and take care of your kids. In the situation I went into, I budgeted and it's my own peace of mind. Now it's weird because I'm going, well, if I die, then my kids are taken care of. And this is what I've got. But then at the same time I'm going, but then I'm going to be dead and I'm not going to be here. But I think just even if it's something so that, like, my thing, I don't want my kids to have to like try and figure out how they're going to get the money together to cremate me. We see that a lot. I don't know if you have it a lot in Ventura, but we see fundraisers, these GoFundMes, these car washes,
everything.
And I just think like how, and I'm not discounting people's financial situations, but if there's something, I guess if you can, and I know that everybody has expenses and stuff, but I just think to myself, like, I don't want my children in that moment to have to go and figure out how they're going to pay to bury me.
Right.
Well, they're not going to bury me. They're going to set me on fire. Big Viking, like, funeral. Not really, but, something cool. but just in that situation. And so bringing it up, taking into account, sometimes you can get really cheap policies through your work but it is a very weird feeling. And to be perfectly honest, the screening for my life insurance was so in depth. It was such a pain in the ass.
Yeah, it was. I watched my husband go through it and I was like, whoa.
Yeah, when you're getting outside health insurance, it was health history. Here's the thing that's a bitch, but to be prepared, I have a mental health history. I've disclosed that before, dealing with depression, anxiety, and an eating disorder. That stuff came up, had to have somebody explain it away. I've never been suicidal, but in the conversations I had to have with the underwriters as they're figuring out the statistics, it was very exposing. But at the end, I do feel like I have some peace of mind knowing that if something were to happen, that's one less thing that my kids would have to deal with.
Right. I saw that a lot in hospice. When the person finally died, the family was like, oh, well. I had many families ask the hospice company, actually, can you pay for the funeral? And it's like, at least the hospice company I worked for, did not have the funds for it. So of course they have the social worker get creative with them and figure out how to pay for it. And it was just gut wrenching. That's the last thing you want to be doing is telling somebody, well, you can do a car wash, you can do this, unless they feel comfortable doing that. But I'm just speaking from personal experience. Most of the families I worked with did not feel comfortable. And It's just like, well, do you have any other family that you can possibly ask to loan you money and pay them back? And it's just, if you can avoid it, why not? Right. And also, just a lot of people don't realize, and this is just for information, purposes, but a lot of people don't realize that pre-arrangements, that's what they call it, in the mortuary field, I guess, is if you make pre-arrangements. So let's say I want to be cremated. I can pay for cremation today at 34 years old. Mm-hmm. And it's usually 30-40% off, as opposed to
Black Friday special.
Yeah. Sorry. Well, I love it.
Let's laugh about it while we can, because that is funny.
Yeah, it is what it is. Yeah, and I don't like wasting money. And you know what? I'd rather have my kids, if I can. Once again, I'm not casting judgment in any way, because to tell you the truth, I can't afford it right now. But if I could, I would. I'd do it right now, because I would rather have my daughter have, if it's $5,000 to cremate me, I'd rather pay $3,000 and then invest $2,000 right now into some mutual fund so that she has $50,000 when I die.
I'm gonna go pay for my cremation and then give that to my kids for Christmas.
Yeah, right. Be like, you don't realize that this is gonna save your ass a lot of money, so you better think.
Okay, so that actually lends well into let's move into talking about final wishes and things like that. Yeah. And then we'll go back to talking about estate planning. Well, I guess it all kind of goes together. So final wishes, these conversations should be had. Your family should know, because I'll tell you this, if my family buries me, I'm going to come back. I don't even believe in ghosts, but I'm going to come back and haunt the shit out of them. Because I'm claustrophobic and I don't like the dark. And I don't like that idea. Do not put me in the ground. Do not.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that don't feel comfortable with that idea. I remember panicking when I found out, because I think in Judaism, actually, it's against I don't know if it's against the religion, but in Judaism, it's not typical for people to be cremated. So they did not cremate my mom, and they buried her. And no joke, I had, oh God, after she died, there were many nights that I had panic attacks. The first time it ever rained after my mom died, I had one of the worst panic attacks.
Oh, yeah.
Thinking about her being in a casket underground, and now it's wet and it's dark and there's worms. And I just epically freaked out. Now I'm okay with it. But it took a long time, and that's another thing that we never talked about. Maybe if my mom would have had a discussion Deanna, I'm not claustrophobic like you. I love dirt. I love worms. I mean, it sounds silly, but if we had that conversation, then maybe my experience after the fact would have been like, well, whatever, she's having a good time in the afterlife.
Right.
But we didn't. So it's just left with all this anxiety and worry and fear, and it gets out of control sometimes.
Yeah. And so, I mean, my mom did this thing where she went and bought plots for everybody at one point, and I remember hearing about that, and then it freaking me out because I was like, why are you already buying plots? But looking back, she was being smart about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, if they put me in the ground, whatever spirit is there is going to come back and haunt the shit out of them. So don't ever do that. But
I'll keep tabs on your family.
I know, right? So it's important to talk about those final wishes, though, too. I don't want, I don't want a traditional funeral. I don't want this and that. But however this looks, we have to go ahead and outline that and let people know. And actually, did you send me the link where you can verbalize this on video? With the advent of video phones, they're taking that as these are final wishes.
Right. I actually just met with an attorney recently to do our estate planning, and I was reading over some literature she gave me. Now, as a medical social worker, I have not legally, I can't help somebody fill out their advanced healthcare directive, but I can inform them about what an advanced healthcare directive is. I can give them the form. I can supportively sit next to them as they read through it and clarify what certain things mean if they're like really, really confused. But like, I can't help them. I can't decide anything. Even if they ask my opinion, I couldn't give my opinion about what I think they should or shouldn't do. That's not my place. And so I'm really passionate about people understanding what an advanced healthcare directive is. So when I was talking to our estate planning attorney, she had some literature on it, and it was actually pointed towards people having their wishes be documented like on a video. And I thought that it was pretty genius because I've seen this before where like, even though an advanced healthcare directive signed and notarized is a legal document, the families would still try to dispute it.
And argue,
and argue about it and say, oh, that's not his handwriting or that's not his signature. And it made things very, very awkward. And really at the end of the day, like, who cares about how we feel and how uncomfortable or awkward it is for medical staff and for the family? Like, I just feel really, really bad for the person in question, like who's just sitting there in their hospital bed, either conscious or unconscious, going, I tried planning this out. I did everything I possibly could have done. And still my wishes aren't being met because everyone's trying to dispute what I wrote down. So what I wanted to briefly just go over real quick in terms of an advanced healthcare directive, because a lot of people don't understand what it is. They've never had to have one or not have one, but they've never been in a situation that called for one.
Right.
An advanced healthcare directive is a legal document that communicates your medical healthcare decisions and wishes down to how comfortable I want to be, what kind of medications I would like in terms of like pain relief, who you appoint as your medical power of attorney. I'll briefly go over that. And there's this document that I would always give out. It's called the 5 Wishes, and it's from a company called Aging with Dignity. You can look it up. And it's recognized, at least this version a couple years ago that I had, it's recognized in like 42 of the states in this country. So an advanced healthcare directive is something that like my husband and I have, and we're healthy and we're not in the hospital. And what I tell people is an advanced healthcare directive, people get very afraid of. I don't want somebody, saying what I want. How would they know? Well, that's what an advanced healthcare directive is. It's a directive, right? So you complete this, and when you appoint somebody as your medical power of attorney, and you've completed this in its entirety, that person is communicating, or at least giving this document to your medical staff, like they've already communicated what they want. This is in the event that you're incapacitated and you can't talk.
So these are not people making choices. Do put me on life support. Don't put me on life support. Pull the plug. None of that. They're not right. Strictly doing what you've written.
This is not making decisions for you because you've made the decision for yourself and written it down in this legal document. And it's just interesting how people are fearful of others making decisions for them. So they avoid having this conversation and they avoid their directive, when what they're fearful of is exactly what's going to happen if you don't have an advanced health.
But that's that avoidance and how we try and, we just head in the sand.
Right. So like an example I can give you is culturally, we had this patient years ago whose family, they never had a discussion, very common. They were uncomfortable talking about death and dying. And the parent was very, very ill. I mean, this story can be one of thousands, hundreds of thousands. And there was the parent who was sick was widowed, and he had a bunch of children, grown children, and they all were at each other's necks about what their dad would have wanted. And the patient was incapacitated, not like in a coma, couldn't talk, and was never going to come out of it, was basically on life support. And they went back and forth for like weeks about whether or not to take him off life support or keep him on life support. And long story short, like the medical staff had discussions with him prior to him actually like losing consciousness, and knew he did not want to be on life support. But they can't make that decision because there's next of kin. And it was just like this, oh man, like
and
nurses.
A mess.
Yeah, it was a mess. They were calling in social workers to like emotionally support the nurses who were having a really hard time, because they knew from what this individual told them, like he didn't want this. But
right.
The family is fighting to keep him alive, and it went to like the hospital ethics board to figure. It was a mess. And I'm sure that family loved each other very much. But what ended up happening for weeks was the family like needed to be escorted out of the hospital a couple times because they started fighting with each other and yelling like over their parents' body in the hospital room. And it's just like, all of this would have not happened. None of this would have happened had there been an advanced healthcare directive.
And so we need to think about things like you said, and we're just bringing this topic up. And from here, we recommend you go and find the right people, and we'll have some resources up and to kind of lead you in that direction. But to have the conversations, do you want to be, some people don't even want CPR. Some people want to be put on life support. Some people have different like lines that they don't want to cross in terms of life-saving interventions. And those are the things that we have to really sit and think and discuss. Another example is because my mom was in need of a kidney transplant and then did have a kidney transplant, from go, it has been very, very clear that my mom was going to be a donor. And if you don't make that stuff clear, you could have next of kin that doesn't believe in tissue and organ donation. And my mom would have been devastated had we not followed those things, those directives in that regard. And so those are the things to kind of think about and put in there. I know for me, like I don't want to be hooked up to a machine forever, but I could see how a family who is trying desperately to hold on to a loved one could have a really hard time making that decision. So it's like,
right. Especially when, right. And especially when, let's say, just for example, I'm not sure if this is exactly what happened, but just as an example, if this man that I was talking about never had that conversation with the family, they're just left with a lot of what ifs and questions.
Right.
So I can actually sympathize and empathize with the family about being so confused and fighting one another. And it's not surprising to people who work in the medical field or, the medical system, but every day conversations are had between a patient and the medical staff. Like nurses and social workers and doctors are oftentimes it's almost like clergy. Like the patient feels at times comfortable to open up and talk to their medical staff about things that they would never talk about with their family. And so I always feel relieved when medical staff can read between those lines and then call the social worker in to facilitate potentially having a conversation with the family and the patient. Because the nurses and doctors should be able to recognize this is a really serious conversation that needs to be explored gently with a clinically trained professional that's done this a lot. So, and call a family meeting and bring in nurses and doctors, because the social worker doesn't do this alone, but the social worker does typically facilitate this type of conversation. I also want to add real quick before we move on is I'll use me as an example. I complete my advanced healthcare directive. I say whatever I say in it, and I appoint my husband, for example. Let's say he and I get divorced, or even we're like fighting really bad. Actually, that's not really good. Let's say we get divorced, and I no longer feel comfortable with him being my representative. It's as easy as ripping it up. Yeah. I've heard a lot of people say, like, I'm scared about signing this because it's like, it's not sword in the stone. Like, this is not concrete signed with blood. You can rip it up and come up with a new one. I've done this many times. Like, people are like, you know what? I need a new copy because it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit anymore. Sometimes people's medical power attorneys, they pass away and they need to do a new one. So I just want to let people know that it's not stuck. You can always redo it. You can always revise it. So I think that makes people feel a little bit more comfortable.
I think that's super important to bring up. As part of the way we're working through this, and this kind of all falls into, you talked about like estate planning. People think, I think sometimes there's this notion of you have to have a lot of property or something to think of like a trust or a will or an estate planning. But these are simple things like if you do own any property, any physical property, if you have belongings that mean something, if you have family heirlooms, the things that matter to you that you care about where they go afterwards. And then it also is, from there, we go into things like, if you do have money, if you do have Social Security, if you do have some sort of pension, but estate planning, going to the right people, and there are attorneys that specialize in this, can be incredibly useful for making sure that everything gets set up so there is no fighting, because that's got to be one of the scariest things I think about when I think about like my dad passing. But I also know that my dad's got it all figured out. And there are even stipulations that can be in there that if you argue, you get nothing. Yeah. I'm not saying like for my family, but it just in general. And so that's important. And to find the right people and resources, and a lot of this stuff, there's even so much stuff online where you can do some of this stuff on your own and then do what you need to do to get it notarized or whatever. Mm-hmm. But just to start having the conversation about your belongings and your things and guardianship of your children, who and your pets. Who's your dog going to go to? Exactly. So I have to say this, we're not attorneys. Not at all. Want to be an attorney. This isn't legal advice. We're just, like you said, I loved it. We're two humans talking about important stuff today. And my husband and I just recently met with an estate planning attorney, and once again, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty details because it's personal, but I've been through like 2 separate occasions that were absolute textbook nightmare, where like the will wasn't prepared right or a will went missing. And so what I will say to the people that are listening is, if you have estate planning documents that you've prepared, it means nothing if you put it in a lockbox and don't tell anybody where the key is. This sounds so simple and almost kind of silly, but I cannot tell you. I've been guilty of not spend the money, do the things, and then you don't.
Yeah. Or here's one that I've personally been through. My mom made a will or a trust or whatever it was. She did some legal documents. She didn't show anybody where they were. when she died, no one knew where they were. It disappeared. So everything goes into probate. You need money for a probate attorney. You need time. It's extremely emotional. That's not even the tip of this fuckery iceberg. Okay. I have been like, seriously, the worst crap. If you make legal documents that communicate, okay, let's say I do. And I say, hey, if I die and my husband is alive, then my husband gets this and my daughter gets this. My husband needs to know where those documents are. People need to know where those documents are. And don't be afraid.
I need to know where my documents are.
Okay. So yeah, I'm speaking to you, Frances.
Like, you are. I know what I'm doing.
Because no joke. If people can't find them, they mean nothing. And then think about them going through all your personal belongings trying to find them. So
there's certain things they can't find.
Yeah. So what my attorney told me was, it's as simple as this. You're going to have important documents, especially like the information that talks about guardianship. She even brought up like, a horrible situation where what if Dan and I were out on date night and our daughter was with a nanny, and God forbid he and I were in a car accident that killed us both. So now what happens?
Right.
And so my daughter is not even 2 years old. She can't figure out where our paperwork is. Like, I need to tell other people. So I already decided I'm going to tell my brother, and I'm going to tell my dad. I'm going to tell a few other people where the documents are going to be, how they can find them. It might not be in my house. It could be in my house, but they're going to know. It's not going to be locked. They can access it. It's not going to be on a computer. Don't do that. Don't be on a computer, because your password might change and you don't remember. It's a nightmare. People have to be able to access it. And, I completely understand people's hesitation of like, well, I don't want them to read it, because then that could make a funky dynamic within the family. What if they read it and find out what I'm planning to give them? It's like, you guys need to have an open discussion about respecting each other's privacy. But that doesn't mean you get to hide those legal documents from your family. And then it's this crazy guessing game after you're gone. And in my case, we never found it. And so what happened was everything ended up going to my stepdad, who I have no contact with. It'd be one thing if my stepdad and I had a good relationship, but it ended years before she even died. And I knew my mom, she talked to me about things that my brother and I were going to get. And we never saw a thing because she was married. So if that isn't a cause for caution, I'm just cautioning everybody to really think through these very important documents.
And what you brought up too, I mean, it's thinking past the point of, oh, I have a car or a house, or I have, just these special things that are from my childhood and photos. It can be on a big level, a small level. But like you mentioned, it's things like, who has access to my email, who has access to my accounts, silly things like being able to log into an account so that you can pay the bills, so that, your family isn't struggling how do we access the money to pay the bills this month? That kind of stuff. So we're bringing this up just in a way of two people having a conversation. And as we mentioned, and as Deanna mentioned, but it bears repeating, this is not legal advice. This is from people who are therapists, who have had parents die, who have had relationships where we've seen it go good and bad, but just having the conversation. And that lends into talking to your social support system about this. And you mentioned it perfectly. A great way to do it is, once you've done it or you're planning, is to then tell them. So I've told my friend, hey, I have you down for this. And it just allowed a conversation to unfold from there, because there's no way to do this conversation without it being weird. It's going to be weird.
Right. And also, like, when I was talking to our attorney about the guardianship specifically, she's like, you're going to pick short-term guardians, you're going to pick long-term guardians, and then if you go through an attorney, hopefully they'll do what my attorney does, which is send out each person a letter who's appointed the guardian to say, hey, Deanna and Dan chose you as the guardian. So please file this away in an important spot. Hopefully it's never had, we never have to use it. But if we do, without that letter, and there you go. And then it doesn't turn into a court battle, because these things end up going to the courts, and then judges decide where your kids are going to go if you have not appointed a guardian.
That happened with my mom. My mom's mom died when she was 5 and her dad when she was 10. And she had a brother that was 17 years older than her. And so at 10 years old, and my mom, her parents, by then both parents died by the time she's 10, there was some stuff that belonged to her parents. And then all of a sudden, I remember her saying, like, kind of vaguely, like, aunts who didn't want anything to do with her were like, we'll take her, because she came with stuff.
Yes.
And that's just disgusting.
Okay, so that brings up a really good point, because I started to panic about that. Like, oh my God, this is my personality. I'm like, what if, God forbid, my husband and I both pass away? And then how does that work? And the attorney was saying, you want to pick like a guardian who's going to parent the same way you do. And don't think about money necessarily. And I was like, but why? Because what if the guardian can love my child the way I can, but they're not so great with money? Let's just say that. And she's like, well, then you pick a trustee. Mm-hmm. So that person, like, as an example, if I picked my best friend to take care of my child, I can pick my brother, who could be the trustee, who then is in control of all the money and the assets that my daughter that's going to inherit. And that's exactly what the attorney said. Like, without any of this set up, you just never know what people's motives are. And then in addition, another good informative piece was, like, if you have life insurance, if you just write it into a will, the beneficiary is your kids. Then when they turn 18, they get all that money at 18 years old. But if you do a trust, then you can specify they get, 25% of the life insurance policy at 18, then at 20, then at 25 and 35 and 45. But a will just says who the beneficiary is. And so when they turn 18, they get all that money. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't feel comfortable with my child at 18 years old, even though I feel like I'm raising a great functioning kid who's going to end up being a great functioning adult. I don't care. I was a good kid, and at 18 years old, I don't know what I would have done with a big chunk of money. Real quick, sorry, I'm rambling. I'm very passionate about this, but trusts can protect your children from, like, predators, from creditors. It can even protect your kids from, let's say they get married. I mean, you're looking real far down the future path, right? Let's say they get married and then they get divorced. Their ex-spouse can't go after their inheritance through the trust.
Yeah, there are certain stipulations for that, and that's why it is really important to think about. I know that was something that my dad talked to me about when he was doing some of his planning, was that this does not go to son-in-laws.
Right. And that's why I always, like, call me a buzzkill, I don't care, but I hate it when I hear people be like, oh, have you heard that so-and-so is a trust fund baby and they have a lot of money? And then all of a sudden, I was always the person that was like, yeah, that means it's their money, not yours, not anybody else's, because it was properly, like, it's in a trust. It's in a trust for them, not anybody else. That is like a pet peeve, or it irks me. I don't like when people are like, oh, they're a trust fund baby and they have a lot of money, so that makes them more attractive. Like, screw you. That's so weird to say. And you can't get their money anyway because it's in a trust.
Nice try. So as we're kind of wrapping things up today, we just wanted to have this opportunity to be like, hey, knock, knock. We're all going to die someday. Start thinking about it.
Yeah. And so next Thanksgiving, this is what you're going to
This is the conversation to have. And I'm going to be totally honest. I'm getting off of doing this podcast. And I know my kids, they always like to come out and ask, like, Mom, what'd you talk about? And talking to them about me dying is terrifying for both of us, but I don't know. I don't know exactly how to do it, but I do know that at 8 and 10, they need to know that things will be taken care of if ever given that situation. So just something to kind of think about as we're wrapping up today. We do want you to know that you can find some of these resources that we've talked about at our websites. I'll put up a blog post about like I did with the grief and loss podcasts that were up. So hopefully we've at least started the conversation, Deanna. I mean,
Yeah.
if it's like,
It's a
hey,
hard one.
listen to our podcast about you dying.
It's really fun and informative stuff.
So we want to flip it around with some feel good news. Look, there's no way to work our way out of this train wreck of a segue. So go ahead.
Hey, we're trying. So feel good, uplifting news. I read today that New Zealand brings in paid domestic violence leave. So New Zealand has passed the world first legislation granting victims of domestic violence 10 days paid leave to allow them to leave their partners, find new homes, and protect themselves and their children. I mean, I posted on Instagram and so many people came out to comment on it, even commenting their personal stories. Like, this is really wonderful that they did this, because people who leave domestic violence situations, they oftentimes have no support, none. They don't have leave time. They're not protected. They can lose their job. They can lose all sorts of things. So I applaud New Zealand for leading the way here.
That is really awesome. And I am thinking of, there's a moving company in the Fresno area here in California that they offer free moving services.
Isn't that Meathead Movers?
Yes. Is it down there too?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So they work with our local domestic violence shelter here, and they got honored at one of the banquets that I went to. And I thought that was great, because those are little things that you don't think about.
We've used them twice because I learned about them providing free moving services for people fleeing domestic violence. And I was like, well, that's the company I want to support. So I've actually used them twice.
That's fantastic. All right. So as we're doing our weekly roundup of things here, we challenge you to work on building resiliency by pushing your comfort zone. Doing something as simple as one new thing a week can be really beneficial in not only finding out if you're good at other things, but also building up that resiliency. If you suck at it, you kind of realize that it's not the end of the world. So Deanna, what have you been doing to work on that one?
Just really taking time away from social media, which is weird because I'm pretty heavily involved with social media, but I'm just being more careful about how much time I'm spending on the old social media machine, because it can be really inspiring and wonderful. And then other days I'm just like, what the hell is happening here? And then you go down the bunny hole. So I'm just trying to keep it simple, guys. I'm just trying to enjoy time with my family, get out and sweat my balls off in this hot summer heat. Sorry. So gross. No, but seriously, I'm just trying to be like, I don't know,
more present.
Enjoy myself. Yeah, be more present. And I'm trying to bring my husband along with it. I'm like, hey, get off your phone. Look at me.
For the ride.
Spend time with me.
So I am notoriously uncoordinated and I just feel like sometimes I'm just walking around like a wrecking ball, but not in a good way, right? Like, at least Miley Cyrus made money off that song.
Just like a disoriented bull in a china shop is me.
Yeah, just like sometimes I feel like I'm just a big clumsy ox. And so anyway, I went yesterday. I challenged somebody to just some games at Dave & Buster's. And usually I'm so self-conscious I'm going to mess up that I don't even – this sounds so silly because I can host radio and do these things. But something like playing air hockey or skee ball in front of somebody I'm getting to know really makes me uncomfortable. And I just was like, fuck it. Let's go. Let's do it. First of all, I killed him. I was way better than I thought I was, which was incredibly good for my ego. There's that resiliency. But it was just that being willing to just kind of be silly and have fun.
Yeah.
Which is something that I did not learn when I was a child that I'm trying to instill in my children now. But it took me 35 years. So there you go.
Better late than never, sister. Better late than never.
And if you listening and I are ever in the same town and there's a giant Jenga around, just know I will beat you. So
destroy. Oh, I love it.
So where can you find you on social media and websites, Deanna?
where I'm avoiding. I'm just kidding.
I know when she is on.
Yeah. Hilarious Humanitarian on Instagram. I'm just come and follow me. I'm still private, but I'll approve you. And then send me messages and I'll write you back because I love you guys. Humanitarian Mom on Instagram if you want to see like my parenting antics. You can follow our podcast at H Humanitarians Podcast. Where can we find you, Miss Frances?
I have my Shut Up Skippy on Instagram and also on Snapchat. I do love Snap. It's kind of fun. And then also shutupskippy.com is up and going.
I loved your new blog post.
Blogs,
I read it.
So how that's going to work is every Tuesday there will be a new blog up from me. It's kind of random. I did a date story that was just terrible.
Oh God.
And then I had somebody who's anonymous who talks about how she is 30 and a virgin, but it wasn't on purpose. Well, it kind of was, but then you had a guest blogger, right? Right. And then by the time this one airs, there will be a new one up about a woman that dealt with having to come off of benzos that were prescribed, but turned into quite the adventure. And we've talked about that in terms of addiction and treatment of mood disorders. So I am looking for people if they want a guest blog. Every Tuesday, there'll be a new blog up from me and then from someone else. So kind of a community of, I don't know, just a place to write. And that is shutupskippy.com. So thank you for listening. Spread the word about our podcast. Rate us, share, subscribe your friends and family when they're not looking. I mean, when they are looking.
Talk to your loved ones about death.
Yeah, and then go and have a conversation when you're done recording podcasts with your child and be like, hey, yo, I'm going to die. So thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
Bye, guys.